The city was alive with its usual chaos, but on this particular night, the streets of New York felt colder than ever. Rain poured relentlessly, turning sidewalks into slippery mirrors that reflected the flickering lights of passing cars and towering skyscrapers. Amidst the hustle and bustle of people rushing to escape the downpour, there was one man who seemed oblivious to it all. His name was Daniel, a homeless man in his late 30s, sitting huddled under an old, torn blanket near Central. Park Daniel's life had not always been like this. Once upon a time, he had dreams, big ones. He'd worked as a mechanic, fixing cars for a living, and even owned a small apartment. But life has a way of testing people, and Daniel had faced more tests than most. The pandemic hit hard, taking away his job and leaving him unable to pay rent. Friends drifted apart, family ties weakened, and before long, Daniel found himself sleeping on park benches and surviving off scraps from trash cans. Yet despite everything, he still carried a quiet dignity about him. His clothes might have been dirty, his face lined with the weariness of years spent struggling, but his eyes held a kindness that refused to fade. That night, Daniel sat shivering under his makeshift shelter, trying to ignore the biting wind and relentless rain. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, so he rummaged through a nearby trash can, hoping to find something edible. As he pulled out a half-eaten sandwich wrapped in crumpled paper, he noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. A woman staggered across the sidewalk, clutching her chest and gasping for air. Her expensive coat and designer handbag stood out starkly against the grimy backdrop of the street. She looked completely out of place here, yet clearly in distress. Without hesitation, Daniel dropped the sandwich and rushed toward her. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he called out, his voice filled with concern. The woman barely managed to nod, her face pale and contorted in pain. She stumbled forward, nearly collapsing onto the wet pavement. Daniel caught her just in time, lowering her gently to the ground. He knelt beside her, shielding her from the rain with his own body. "What's wrong? Can I call someone for you?" She shook her head weakly, struggling to speak. Finally, she whispered, "My heart. It's hurting." Those 3 words sent a jolt of alarm through Daniel. He didn't need medical training to know this wasn't just fatigue or stress. It was serious. Every second counted. But there was a problem. Daniel didn't own a phone. Homeless for months, he couldn't afford one, let alone keep it charged. Thinking quickly, he scanned the street for help. Spotting a yellow taxi slowly cruising by, he flagged it down, waving frantically until the driver pulled over. "Please," Daniel pleaded through the open window. "This lady needs a hospital right now." The driver hesitated, glancing skeptically at Daniel's disheveled appearance. For a moment, Daniel feared the man would drive off, leaving them stranded. But then the driver must have seen the desperation in Daniel's eyes, because he nodded and stepped out of the car to help. Together, they lifted the woman into the back seat, and Daniel climbed in beside her, holding her hand tightly. "You're going to be fine," he reassured her, though he wasn't sure if she could hear him over the sound of the rain pounding against the roof. The ride to the hospital felt endless. The woman's breathing grew shallower with each passing minute, and Daniel fought back panic. He focused instead on keeping her calm, murmuring words of encouragement even as his own heart raced. When they finally arrived at the emergency entrance, paramedics rushed to meet them, wheeling the woman inside while Daniel followed close behind. In the waiting room, Daniel paced nervously, wringing his hands as doctors and nurses buzzed around. Hours ticked by, each one feeling longer than the last. Eventually, a nurse approached him, her expression softening when she saw the worry etched on his face. "Thank you," she said sincerely. "You saved her life tonight. If you hadn't acted so quickly, things could have turned out much worse." Relief washed over Daniel, but he simply nodded, too overwhelmed to respond. Moments later, a doctor appeared, explaining that the woman had suffered a mild heart attack but was stable now. They allowed Daniel to see her briefly, and when he entered the room, he found her awake, looking frail but grateful. Her name, she told him, was Evelyn Carter. Evelyn spoke softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. If you hadn't been there. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Daniel shrugged modestly, brushing aside her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same, he replied, though deep down, he knew that wasn't true. Many people would have walked past assuming someone else would step in, but Daniel had never been one to turn away from someone in need. As they talked, Daniel learned a little about Evelyn's life. She mentioned her husband Richard and their successful business, but Daniel didn't think much of it at the time. To him, she was just another person who needed help, and helping others was what gave his difficult life meaning. What he didn't realize was that this chance encounter would set off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. For Evelyn, meeting Daniel was nothing short of extraordinary. Here was a man who had nothing, no home, no money, no safety net, and yet he had risked his own comfort to save a stranger. In that moment, lying vulnerable in a hospital bed, Evelyn made a silent promise to herself. She would do whatever it took to repay Daniel's kindness. Little did either of them know, this act of compassion was only the beginning of a remarkable journey. And so, as the rain continued to fall outside, washing away the grime of the city streets, a bond began to form between two people from vastly different worlds. It was a bond built not on wealth or status but on humanity, a shared understanding that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can lead to the greatest transformations. The hospital room was quiet except for the soft beeping of machines monitoring Evelyn's vital signs. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the chill still lingered in the air. Evelyn lay propped up on pillows, her face pale but calm. She watched Daniel as he stood awkwardly by the door, unsure whether to stay or leave. His clothes were damp from the rain, and his hands fidgeted nervously. Despite his disheveled appearance, Evelyn couldn't help but admire the kindness that radiated from him. There was something about this man, something genuine that made her feel safe. "Please sit down," she said softly, gesturing to the chair beside her bed. Daniel hesitated for a moment before pulling it closer and sitting down. He avoided, meeting her eyes, instead focusing on the floor. "I mean it," Evelyn continued, her voice firm yet warm. "You saved my life tonight. I owe you more than I can ever repay." Daniel shook his head quickly, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "It wasn't anything special," he mumbled. "Just doing what anyone would do." But Evelyn didn't agree. She'd seen enough of the world to know that not everyone would have acted the way Daniel did. Most people would have walked past, assuming someone else would step in. Yet here was this man, who had nothing, not even a phone, but still managed to put her needs above his own. Curiosity got the better of her, and Evelyn began asking questions. "Where are you from? Do you live around here?" she asked gently, trying not to pry too much. Daniel hesitated again, clearly uncomfortable talking about himself. After a pause, he answered quietly, "I used to work as a mechanic, fixing cars. But when the pandemic hit, well, things fell apart. Lost my job, then my apartment. Been living on the streets ever since." Evelyn listened intently, her heart breaking at every word. She couldn't imagine what it must feel like to lose everything, to go from having a stable life to being completely alone. And yet, despite all he'd been through, Daniel hadn't let bitterness consume him. Instead, he carried himself with a quiet dignity, choosing to help others even when he had so little to give. "I'm sorry you've had to go through that," Evelyn said sincerely. "But I want you to know, you're not invisible. What you did tonight proves that. You matter." Her words caught Daniel off guard, and for a brief moment, his tough exterior cracked. He looked away, blinking rapidly to hide the tears forming in his eyes. Before either of them could say anything more, a nurse entered the room to check on Evelyn. Seeing that she was stable, the nurse informed them that visiting hours were almost over. Reluctantly, Daniel stood up to leave. As he reached the doorway, Evelyn called out, "Wait, can I at least get your name?" He turned back, offering a small smile. "Daniel," he replied. "My name's Daniel." "Well, Daniel," Evelyn said, her tone resolute, "this isn't the last time we'll see each other. I promise you that." 2 days later, Evelyn was discharged from the hospital. Though she felt weak and tired, her mind was racing with thoughts of Daniel. She couldn't stop thinking about the man who had risked his own comfort to save her life. Determined to find him, she returned to the same street corner near Central Park where their paths had crossed. It didn't take long to spot him. He was exactly where she remembered, huddled under his tattered blanket, staring blankly at the ground. When Evelyn approached, Daniel looked up in surprise. Recognition dawned on his face, and he scrambled to his feet. "Mrs. Carter?" he stammered, clearly embarrassed to be seen in such a state. "What are you doing here?" "I came to thank you properly," Evelyn replied, holding out a bag filled with food and fresh clothes. "And to make sure you're okay." Daniel stared at the bag, unsure how to react. "You didn't have to do this," he muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. Evelyn smiled warmly. "Yes, I did. Because you deserve it." They sat together on the curb, sharing stories as the city buzzed around them. Evelyn learned more about Daniel's struggles, the jobs he'd lost, the friends who'd drifted away, the loneliness that came with living on the streets. In turn, Daniel discovered that Evelyn wasn't just any ordinary woman. She was married to Richard Carter, the CEO of Cartech Industries, one of the largest tech companies in the country. The revelation left him speechless. Here he was, a homeless man with nothing to his name, sitting beside someone who lived in a completely different world. Despite their differences, Evelyn treated Daniel with respect and sincerity. She listened to him without judgment, her eyes filled with empathy. When their conversation turned to the future, Evelyn surprised him by saying, "I want to help you, Daniel. Not because I pity you, but because I believe in you. You have potential. You just need a chance." At first, Daniel dismissed the idea. "I don't think I'm cut out for fancy offices or big companies," he admitted. "Besides, no one's going to hire me looking like this." "That's why we start small," Evelyn countered. "We'll get you cleaned up, find you a place to stay, and figure out what comes next, one step at a time." Her determination was infectious, and Daniel found himself nodding reluctantly. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope for a better life, for a second chance. Little did he know, Evelyn already had a plan brewing in her mind. Later that evening, Evelyn returned home to her luxurious penthouse overlooking the city skyline. Richard, her husband, was waiting for her, concern etched on his face. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked, pulling her into a tight embrace. Evelyn nodded, wrapping her arms around him. "I'm fine. Thanks to an extraordinary man named Daniel." Richard raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Who's Daniel?" So Evelyn told him the entire story, from the rainy night when Daniel saved her life to their recent meeting on the street. By the time she finished, Richard was visibly moved. "That's quite a tale," he said thoughtfully. "What do you plan to do now?" "I want to offer him a job," Evelyn declared, "at Cartech. He may not have qualifications, but he has something far more valuable: character. He's kind, resourceful, and willing to work hard. All he needs is an opportunity." Richard hesitated, his businessman instincts kicking in. "Evelyn, I admire your compassion, but hiring someone off the street isn't exactly standard procedure. We have protocols, interviews, background checks, and sometimes those protocols keep us from seeing the bigger picture." Evelyn interrupted firmly. "This isn't about charity. It's about giving someone a fair shot. Trust me, Richard. If you meet him, you'll understand." Reluctantly, Richard agreed to at least meet Daniel. The next morning, Evelyn arranged for a car to pick Daniel up and bring him to Cartech's headquarters. Dressed in the clean clothes Evelyn had provided, Daniel arrived looking nervous but determined. The towering glass building intimidated him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong there. Inside, Richard greeted him with a handshake and led him to a private office. Over coffee, they talked about Daniel's past, his skills, and his aspirations. To Daniel's amazement, Richard seemed genuinely interested in his story. By the end of the meeting, Richard extended an offer, a position in the company's logistics department, where Daniel could learn on the job. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady income and a fresh start. For Daniel, the offer felt like a miracle. Tears welled up in his eyes as he accepted, overwhelmed by the kindness of two strangers who had chosen to believe in him. As he left the building, he glanced back at the towering skyscraper, a symbol of hope and possibility. For the first time in years, Daniel dared to dream of a brighter future. Meanwhile, Evelyn watched from her office window, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. She knew Daniel's journey wouldn't be easy, but she also knew he had the strength to overcome whatever challenges lay ahead. And deep down, she felt a sense of pride, not just in Daniel, but in the power of human connection to transform lives. In that moment, both Evelyn and Daniel realized something profound. Sometimes fate brings people together not by coincidence but by design. Their worlds might have been vastly different, but their shared humanity had bridged the gap between them. And as they stepped forward into this new chapter, neither of them could predict the incredible impact their bond would have, not just on their own lives, but on countless others as well. Daniel's first day at Cartech Industries was unlike anything he had ever experienced. The sleek glass building, bustling with employees dressed in sharp suits and polished shoes, felt like a different planet compared to the gritty streets where he had spent the last few years. He walked through the revolving doors clutching a folder containing his new employee ID and orientation schedule, feeling both excited and out of place. His heart raced as he stepped into the elevator, surrounded by people chatting about meetings, deadlines, and stock prices, terms that sounded foreign to him. Evelyn had arranged for Daniel to start in the logistics department, a section of the company responsible for managing shipments, inventory, and supply chains. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was practical, hands-on, and something Daniel could learn quickly. On his first morning, he met Sarah, his supervisor, who greeted him with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Daniel," she said, handing him a clipboard. "We're glad to have you here." Sarah introduced him to the team, most of whom were friendly enough but clearly curious about this newcomer who didn't quite fit the mold. Some whispered behind his back, wondering why someone like Daniel, a man with no formal education or corporate experience, had been hired. Others assumed he must have connections, unaware of the real story behind his hiring. Daniel ignored the murmurs, focusing instead on soaking up as much information as possible. He knew proving himself wouldn't be easy, but he was determined to show everyone, including himself, that he belonged. The days turned into weeks, and Daniel threw himself into his work with relentless energy. Every task, no matter how small, became an opportunity to prove his worth. Whether it was organizing pallets in the warehouse, tracking delivery schedules, or troubleshooting delays, Daniel approached each responsibility with focus and determination. He often stayed late, asking questions and observing how things worked. Slowly but surely, he began to understand the intricacies of the job. Evelyn checked in on him regularly, offering guidance and encouragement whenever he needed it. She became more than just his benefactor. She became a mentor and friend. During one of their conversations over lunch, she asked, "How are you finding everything so far? Is it overwhelming?" Daniel hesitated before answering. "It's different," he admitted. "I'm used to fixing cars, not spreadsheets, but I'm learning. Everyone here is smart and I don't want to let them down." "You won't," Evelyn assured him. "You've already proven your character. Now it's just about gaining confidence. Trust me, Daniel, you're doing better than you think." Her words gave him strength, but they also reminded him of the gap between his current reality and the life he hoped to build. Daniel knew he couldn't rely solely on Evelyn's support forever. He needed to carve out his own path within the company. One afternoon, while reviewing shipment records, Daniel noticed a recurring issue. Certain deliveries were consistently delayed due to inefficient routing. This problem had been flagged multiple times in staff meetings, but no one seemed to have a solution. Intrigued, Daniel spent his evenings studying maps and analyzing data, searching for patterns that might explain the delays. After several days of research, he came up with an idea. What if they optimized their delivery routes using software that accounted for traffic patterns, weather conditions, and peak hours? Excited by his discovery, Daniel hesitated to share it. Who was he, a former mechanic turned logistics assistant, to propose changes to such a large operation? But Evelyn's voice echoed in his mind. Trust yourself. Taking a deep breath, he scheduled a meeting with Richard Carter. When Daniel entered Richard's office, he felt a wave of nerves wash over him. Richard sat behind a massive desk littered with papers and laptops, exuding the aura of a man who commanded respect. Yet when Daniel explained his findings, Richard listened intently, his expression unreadable. By the time Daniel finished presenting his proposal, Richard leaned back in his chair, visibly impressed. "This is impressive," Richard said finally. "You've identified a problem we've struggled with for months, and you've come up with a solution. Have you run this by anyone else?" "No, sir," Daniel replied honestly. "I wasn't sure if it was worth mentioning." "Well, it absolutely is," Richard said firmly. "Let's bring this to the next executive meeting. If your plan works, it could save us millions annually." Daniel left the office feeling a mix of disbelief and pride. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to dream, not just of surviving, but of thriving. Over the following weeks, his idea gained traction. Engineers tested the proposed software, and early results showed significant improvements in delivery efficiency. Soon, Daniel's name was being mentioned in boardroom discussions, and colleagues who once doubted him began to see him in a new light. Despite his growing success, Daniel never forgot where he came from. Every weekend, he returned to the shelter where he had once sought refuge, volunteering his time to help others facing similar struggles. He shared meals with those still living on the streets, offering advice and encouragement whenever he could. To Daniel, these acts of kindness weren't just about giving back. They were reminders of the journey that had brought him here. One evening, while serving dinner at the shelter, Daniel struck up a conversation with a young man named Marcus. Like Daniel, Marcus had fallen on hard times after losing his job during the pandemic. Listening to his story, Daniel saw echoes of his own past, the same desperation, the same hopelessness. Determined to help, Daniel offered Marcus a chance. He would speak to Evelyn and see if Cartech could provide temporary employment until Marcus got back on his feet. Marcus accepted gratefully, and with Evelyn's approval, he joined the company's janitorial staff. Watching Marcus thrive inspired Daniel even further. He realized that his role at Cartech wasn't just about climbing the corporate ladder, it was about creating opportunities for others, just as Evelyn and Richard had done for him. As months passed, Daniel continued to rise through the ranks at Cartech. His innovative ideas earned him recognition, and his dedication won over skeptical co-workers. People began referring to him as the guy who sees solutions where others see problems. Even Richard started relying on Daniel's insights, inviting him to brainstorming sessions and strategy meetings. But amidst all the success, Daniel remained grounded. He rented a modest apartment near the city center, furnished with second-hand furniture and a single-framed photo of Central Park, the place where his life had changed forever. Each night, as he looked out at the skyline, he reflected on how far he'd come. From sleeping on park benches to sitting in boardrooms, his journey was proof that resilience and kindness could overcome even the toughest odds. Meanwhile, Evelyn watched Daniel's transformation with immense pride. She often told Richard, "He's exactly what this company and this world needs more of. Someone who leads with heart." Richard agreed wholeheartedly. "You were right about him," he admitted one evening over dinner. "Not only has he saved money for the company, but he's also reminded us of what truly matters: humanity." For Daniel, every challenge he faced served as a stepping stone toward a brighter future. He knew there would always be obstacles ahead, but he also knew he wasn't alone. With Evelyn and Richard's support, and his unwavering belief in himself, he was ready to take on whatever came next. And so, as the sun set over New York City, casting golden hues across its towering skyscrapers, Daniel smiled to himself. He had started as a homeless man with nothing to his name, but now he was a symbol of hope, perseverance, and the power of second chances. Little did he know, however, that his story was far from over. Despite Daniel's growing success at Cartech Industries, life wasn't without its hurdles. The transition from homelessness to corporate life was more challenging than he had anticipated. While his innovative ideas and hard work earned him respect among some colleagues, others remained skeptical, or even hostile. Whispers followed him through the hallways, questioning how someone like him had managed to rise so quickly in such a prestigious company. Some accused him of riding on Evelyn's coattails, while others dismissed his contributions as beginner's luck. At first, Daniel tried to ignore the negativity. He reminded himself that he hadn't come this far just to let gossip bring him down. But as the whispers grew louder, they began to chip away at his confidence. One particularly difficult day, after a team meeting where his suggestion for improving warehouse efficiency was met with silence and rolled eyes, Daniel retreated to the break room feeling defeated. Evelyn found him there later that afternoon, staring blankly into a cup of coffee. Sensing his frustration, she sat beside him. "What's wrong?" she asked gently. Daniel hesitated before speaking. "I don't think I belong here," he admitted, his voice heavy with self-doubt. "People are talking behind my back. They don't think I deserve to be in this position." Evelyn sighed, her expression softening. "Let me tell you something, Daniel. Success isn't measured by how many people cheer for you. It's measured by how much impact you make. And trust me, your ideas are making a difference. Don't let their opinions define you." Her words struck a chord, but Daniel still struggled to shake off the weight of judgment. That evening, as he walked home under the glow of streetlights, he replayed Evelyn's advice in his mind. She was right. He couldn't control what others thought of him. What mattered was staying true to himself and continuing to give his best effort. Determined to prove his critics wrong, Daniel doubled down on his work. He spent extra hours studying logistic systems, analyzing data, and brainstorming new ways to improve processes. One night, while reviewing quarterly reports, he stumbled upon another issue: excessive packaging waste. The company was spending millions on materials that ended up in landfills, harming both the environment and the bottom line. Inspired by his earlier success with delivery routes, Daniel proposed a plan to switch to eco-friendly packaging options. This time, however, pitching. His idea wasn't as straightforward. When Daniel presented his proposal during a department meeting, several senior managers pushed back. "It's too expensive," one argued. "We can't afford to overhaul our entire supply chain just for sustainability." "But we can't afford not to," Daniel countered firmly. "Customers care about the environment now more than ever. If we don't adapt, we risk losing business to competitors who prioritize green practices." His argument caught Richard's attention, and after further discussion, Richard agreed to test Daniel's plan on a smaller scale. The pilot program launched 3 months later, and the results were staggering. Not only did switching to sustainable packaging reduce costs over time, but it also boosted Cartech's public image, earning praise from environmental organizations and customers alike. For the second time, Daniel's innovation proved invaluable to the company, and this time no one could deny his contribution. As Daniel gained recognition within Cartech, he also faced personal challenges outside of work. Adjusting to life in an apartment after years of living on the streets wasn't easy. Simple tasks like grocery shopping or paying bills felt overwhelming at times. There were days when loneliness crept in, reminding him of the isolation he'd endured during his darkest moments. But Daniel refused to let those feelings consume him. Instead, he channeled his energy into helping others. Every weekend he volunteered at local shelters, mentoring individuals struggling with homelessness. He shared his story openly, hoping to inspire them to believe in second chances. "I know how hard it is to imagine a better future when you're stuck in survival mode," he told a group of men gathered around him one Saturday morning. "But if I can do it, so can you. All it takes is one step forward." His efforts didn't go unnoticed. Word spread about the former homeless man who had turned his life around and was now giving back to the community. Local newspapers featured Daniel in articles highlighting his journey, and soon, invitations to speak at events poured in. At first, Daniel declined, fearing public speaking wasn't his strength, but Evelyn encouraged him to embrace the opportunity. "You have a powerful message to share," she said. "Don't let fear hold you back." Reluctantly, Daniel agreed to deliver a keynote speech at a charity gala hosted by Cartech. Standing on stage under bright lights, he felt his palms sweat and his heart race. But as he looked out at the audience filled with executives, philanthropists, and even strangers who had once been in his shoes, he found his voice. "I'm not here because I'm special," he began, his tone steady despite his nerves. "I'm here because someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." Evelyn Carter saw potential in a homeless man sitting on a park bench, and Richard Carter gave me a chance most people wouldn't have dared to take. Because of them, I've learned that kindness and opportunity can change lives, including my own. The crowd erupted into applause, moved by Daniel's honesty and humility. Afterward, dozens of attendees approached him to thank him for sharing his story. Many promised to support causes aimed at helping the homeless, inspired by his example. For Daniel, the experience reinforced the importance of using his platform to create positive change. Back at Cartech, Daniel's growing influence extended beyond logistics. Employees began seeking his input on projects outside his department, valuing his fresh perspective and problem-solving skills. His presence challenged the traditional corporate mindset, reminding everyone that talent and potential aren't defined by background or education. Even skeptics warmed up to him, recognizing his dedication and authenticity. One day, Richard called Daniel into his office. "We're restructuring leadership roles across departments," he explained, "and I want you to consider taking on a managerial position. You've earned it." Daniel blinked in disbelief. A managerial role? Him? The thought seemed almost surreal. Yet deep down, he knew he was ready. Accepting the promotion marked a turning point, not just in his career but in his sense of identity. No longer was he the man who had nothing. He was a leader, a contributor, and a beacon of hope for those still struggling. As Daniel settled into his new responsibilities, he made it a priority to mentor junior employees, especially those who came from disadvantaged backgrounds. He understood firsthand how daunting it could feel to enter a world so different from your own, and he wanted to ease that transition for others. Under his guidance, several young workers flourished, gaining confidence and excelling in their roles. Meanwhile, Evelyn watched proudly as Daniel continued to grow. "He's become more than just an employee," she told Richard one evening. "He's part of the family." Richard nodded in agreement. "And he's reminded us all of what truly matters: compassion, resilience, and believing in people, even when they doubt themselves." For Daniel, every challenge he overcame strengthened his resolve to keep pushing forward. He knew there would always be obstacles ahead, but he also knew he wasn't alone. With Evelyn and Richard's unwavering support and his unshakable belief in the power of kindness, he was ready to face whatever came next. And so, as another chapter of his journey unfolded, Daniel realized that his story wasn't just about rising above adversity, it was about lifting others along the way. Little did he know, however, that his greatest challenge and his most profound triumph was yet to come. Years passed, and Daniel's transformation from a homeless man to a respected leader at Cartech Industries became the stuff of legend. His journey wasn't just a personal victory. It was a testament to resilience, compassion, and the ripple effect of kindness. Yet despite his success, Daniel never allowed himself to forget where he came from. Every morning, as he tied his polished shoes and tucked his crisp shirt into tailored pants, he reminded himself of the cold nights spent huddled under a tattered blanket near Central Park. Those memories grounded him, keeping his ego in check and fueling his desire to give back. By now, Daniel had risen to the position of Vice President of Operations at Cartech. It was a role that demanded long hours, strategic thinking, and constant innovation, but it also gave him a platform to enact meaningful change. Under his leadership, the company adopted policies aimed at reducing waste, supporting local communities, and providing opportunities for marginalized groups. One of his proudest achievements was establishing a program called Second Chances, which offered employment and mentorship to individuals struggling with homelessness or financial hardship. Inspired by his own experience, Daniel ensured that participants received not only jobs but also access to resources like housing assistance, counseling, and educational training. The impact of the Second Chances initiative spread far beyond Cartech. Other companies began adopting similar programs inspired by Daniel's vision. News outlets hailed him as a pioneer in corporate social responsibility, and invitations to speak at conferences around the world flooded his inbox. Yet Daniel remained humble, always deflecting praise onto those who had helped him along the way, Evelyn, Richard, and even strangers who had shown him small acts of kindness during his darkest days. One evening, as Daniel prepared to leave the office, Evelyn stopped by his desk with an unexpected request. "We're hosting our annual gala next week," she said, her eyes twinkling mischievously. "And I think it's time you took center stage." Daniel raised an eyebrow, already sensing what was coming. "You mean—" "Yes," Evelyn confirmed with a grin. "Richard and I want you to deliver the keynote speech this year. No excuses." Though flattered, Daniel hesitated. Public speaking still made him nervous, especially when addressing such high-profile audiences. But Evelyn wouldn't take no for an answer. "You've earned this moment," she insisted. "Besides, your story inspires people. Trust me, they need to hear it." Reluctantly, Daniel agreed. Over the next few days, he poured his heart into crafting a speech that would honor his past while inspiring others to believe in their potential. When the night of the gala arrived, he stood backstage, peering out at the elegant ballroom filled with influential figures from various industries. The room buzzed with anticipation, and Daniel felt his stomach churn with nerves. But then he spotted Evelyn and Richard seated at the front table, smiling encouragingly at him. Taking a deep breath, he stepped onto the stage. As the spotlight illuminated his face, he scanned the audience and began to speak. "Good evening," he started, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "When I was asked to give this speech tonight, I thought about all the things I could say about innovation, leadership, and the future of business. But as I reflected on my journey, I realized there's one theme that ties everything together: humanity." He paused, letting the word sink in before continuing. "I used to think success was measured by wealth, titles, and power, but life taught me otherwise. True success isn't about climbing ladders, it's about lifting others as you climb. It's about seeing the person behind the struggle and extending a hand even when you have nothing to gain." Daniel went on to recount his own story, from losing his job and home to meeting Evelyn on that rainy night and finding purpose at Cartech. He spoke candidly about the challenges he faced along the way, including self-doubt, criticism, and moments when giving up seemed easier than pushing forward. But he also emphasized the importance of perseverance, gratitude, and believing in second chances. "When Evelyn and Richard gave me an opportunity, they didn't just change my life. They reminded me that everyone has value, regardless of their circumstances," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's why I'm committed to paying it forward. Because kindness isn't just an act, it's a cycle, and every time we choose to help someone, we create ripples that can transform lives." As he concluded his speech, the room erupted into thunderous applause. Many attendees wiped away tears, deeply moved by Daniel's authenticity and vulnerability. Later that evening, dozens of people approached him to express their admiration and gratitude. Some shared their own struggles, while others promised to support initiatives like Second Chances. For Daniel, the overwhelming response reinforced his belief in the power of storytelling to inspire action. In the months following the gala, Daniel's influence continued to grow. He expanded the Second Chances program nationwide, partnering with shelters, nonprofits, and government agencies to reach more people in need. He also launched a scholarship fund for underprivileged youth, ensuring that financial barriers wouldn't prevent them from pursuing education and career opportunities. Each new project brought fresh challenges, but Daniel tackled them with the same determination that had carried him through his toughest days. Meanwhile, Evelyn and Richard grew closer to Daniel, treating him almost like family. They invited him to dinners, introduced him to influential contacts, and celebrated his milestones as if they were their own. Their bond transcended professional boundaries, rooted in mutual respect and shared values. Even Marcus, the young man Daniel had once mentored at the shelter, thrived under his guidance, eventually becoming a supervisor within Cartech's logistics department. Despite his busy schedule, Daniel made time for reflection. On quiet evenings, he often returned to Central Park, sitting on the same bench where he had spent countless nights sleeping rough. Watching the city lights twinkle against the night sky, he marveled at how far he'd come. From a man with nothing to lose to a leader with everything to offer, his journey was proof that life's greatest victories are often born from its deepest struggles. One day, as Daniel strolled through the park, he noticed a familiar figure huddled under a blanket. Nearby, the man looked up cautiously, his eyes wary yet hopeful. Without hesitation, Daniel approached him, offering a warm smile. "Hey there," he said softly. "Mind if I sit with you for a bit?" The man nodded, clearly surprised by the gesture. As they talked, Daniel listened intently, sharing stories of his own past and encouraging the stranger to hold on to hope. By the end of their conversation, the man's demeanor had shifted. He sat taller, his eyes brighter as though a weight had been lifted. Walking away later, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. No matter how much he achieved, he knew his mission would always be the same: to remind others that they mattered, that their struggles didn't define them, and that second chances were possible. In that moment, he realized something profound. His journey wasn't just about rising above adversity. It was about creating a legacy of compassion that would endure long after he was gone. And so, as the sun set over New York City, casting golden hues across its towering skyscrapers, Daniel smiled to himself. Life had tested him in ways he never imagined, but it had also given him gifts beyond measure: friendship, purpose, and the ability to make a difference. Though he couldn't predict what the future held, one thing was certain: he would continue, walking this path with humility, gratitude, and unwavering faith in the goodness of humanity. For Daniel, the story wasn't over. It was just beginning.